There are some questions in history that are just so huge, they change everything. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest. What if World War II never happened? We're going to run a little thought experiment here to really understand the world we live in now by imagining a past that went down a totally different path. All right, let's get into it. Just let that sink in for a second. No Dunkirk, no Battle of Britain, no Pearl Harbor, no Stalingrad. It's almost unthinkable. But by trying to imagine this, by walking down this alternate timeline, we start to see just how deeply that war carved out the shape of our modern world.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll set the scene, what the world looked like right before the breaking point. Then we'll pinpoint that fork in the road where war was avoided. After that, we'll explore what the New World map might have looked like, the unexpected effects on technology and society, and finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the war's incredible shadow on our own lives today.
Okay, so before we can erase the war, we have to understand just how close it was. Let's go back in time to the late 1930s. The air is thick with tension, and you can feel that something is about to break. The whole world was basically a powder keg waiting for a spark. You have to remember, the trauma from World War I, the war to end all wars, was still so raw. On top of that, the Great Depression had shattered the global economy. And all that instability, it was the perfect breeding ground for these aggressive nationalist governments popping up in Germany, Italy, and Japan. Meanwhile, you still have these massive European colonial empires stretching across the globe. And the one institution that was supposed to stop all this, the League of Nations, well, it was basically useless. Right, so this is it. This is the moment where history splits. We're standing at a fork in the road, looking at the path that was never taken. You can see the dominoes falling, one by one. The Rhineland, the Munich Agreement, each step brought the world closer to the abyss. In our history, of course, the invasion of Poland was the final push. But what if it wasn't? In our thought experiment, right at the last second, something changes. Maybe it's a diplomatic miracle. Maybe there's a coup. For whatever reason, the invasion stops. The war is averted.
Now, what we're doing here, this whole what-if game, actually has a name. It's called counterfactual history. And the point isn't just to make up a fun story. It's a tool. We use this imaginary scenario to shine a really bright light on the actual impact the war had on our own real timeline. So, with war off the table, the first thing that changes, and changes dramatically, is the map of the world itself. The entire balance of global power gets thrown into the air. But before we even get to maps and borders, let's start with the most important change of all. This number, 75 million, that's how many people are estimated to have died in World War II. In our alternate world, that unfathomable loss, all those families, those futures, they're saved. That tragedy just never happens. Okay, so think about the Cold War. In our timeline, the war left Europe in ruins and turned the USA and the Soviet Union into the two global superpowers staring each other down. Without the war, that just doesn't happen. Instead, you'd likely have a world with multiple great powers, the British Empire, France, and yes, a still powerful Germany, all competing for influence. A whole different ballgame. And what about their empires? World War II was the death knell for colonialism. It bankrupted the old European powers and lit a fire under independence movements everywhere. Without that massive shock to the system, it's pretty likely the British and French empires, among others, would have held on for a lot longer, changing the history of literally billions of people. And then there's the United Nations. The UN was created for one reason, to prevent another world war. It was born from absolute desperation. In a world that just barely dodged that bullet, that desperate urgency just isn't there. The old, toothless League of Nations might have stuck around, but that powerful global body we know today probably wouldn't exist. But the changes go way deeper than just lines on a map. A world without the war would have sent ripples through time, completely changing our technology, our society, really the very fabric of our daily lives. You've probably heard that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, this quote adds a dark twist. War is the most awful, most terrible kind of necessity imaginable, but it forces innovation at a speed that is just breathtaking. It's honestly wild when you look at how much of our modern world was fast-tracked by the war. Nuclear power came directly from the atomic bomb project. Jet engines were built for fighter planes. The very first digital computers invented to crack codes. Even the ability to mass-produce penicillin was perfected because they needed to treat millions of wounded soldiers. It really makes you wonder, right? Our entire digital, high-speed, interconnected world is, in so many ways, a direct consequence of that conflict. Without that terrible pressure cooker, how slow would progress have been? Would our world today feel more like the 1950s? That's a crazy thought. And it wasn't just tech. The war turned society completely upside down. With millions of men fighting overseas, women flooded into factories. Minority groups were given opportunities they'd never had before. And once that happened, you couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. It challenged all the old rules and became a huge spark for the civil rights and women's movements later on. Without the war, that fight for equality might have looked very, very different. So let's bring this all home. This whole exercise isn't really about some alternate sci-fi past. It's about looking in the mirror and understanding the DNA of the world we're living in right now. I mean, just look at the massive shift. The war didn't just nudge things around. It completely demolished the old world order of sprawling empires and nations hiding behind their borders, and it replaced it with something entirely new, a world of superpowers, global organizations, and an interconnectedness nobody could have imagined before. At the end of the day, this is the big takeaway. So much of what we take for granted, from the computer I'm talking to you on, to the alliances that shape our news, to the very idea of universal human rights, it was all forged in the fire of that 6-year conflict. To imagine a world without the war is to imagine a place we would barely recognize. Which brings us to this final really tough question. Of course, a world that saves 75 million lives is, without a doubt, a better world. But it would also be a world that developed much more slowly. A world where many of the social and technological changes that define our lives, for good and for ill, might never have happened or happened very differently. It's a complicated, messy legacy. And that right there is the war's lasting shadow.